Hey everyone, welcome to this class. Today we're going to be talking about how to crack a Mifare Classic card with NFC tools. This is the cheap way to do this. Instead of going out buying a Proxmark for 150 bucks, you can get these readers for about 25 from China. With shipping and other cards, they end up being about $35. So what I'm going to do to start is I'm actually going to get started on one of these cards, and we will see how long this one takes to crack.
What card is that?
So this card here is it's a Mifare Classic card, but it's an unhardened card. So this is one that in theory is going to be very, very easy to crack. So I'm just going to start that off. And the whole thing that I'm doing with this class is we're showing how easy it is with some automation that this guy's figured out. It's a very lazy way to crack cards. So while that runs, we're going to get the class started. I am known as the Fed. A little bit about me. I'm a sysadmin. I have a lot of nerdy hobbies. I do 3D printing. I do this stuff. I am considered a cyborg because I now have an NFC chip in my hand. You can follow me on Twitter at @thefed, or you can always email me at thefed@gmail.com. So one of the things I've been able to do with my current job is travel, and I do a lot of travel. While I'm out doing that type of thing, I collect stuff from the hotel rooms. I collect a lot of stuff. This is a bunch of hotel soaps and stuff that I've collected over, this is about between 6 months and a year of travel, but I also collect hotel key cards. So in this batch, you can see I've got like 3 piles of keys, and we'll go over those different types of cards as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the different Mifare families. We're going to talk about the vulnerabilities of them. We're going to talk about how some of this stuff works, and then we're going to go through and do the demo on automating it. So the stuff that you'll need to start is you will need a Kali Linux install. It's much easier if you do a bare metal install. And actually, it looks like this first one that we kicked off is about done. So we are done cracking this first card. This card is an unhardened card, and now that we're done, we can clone it. So it's asking me if I want to clone. So I will get one of my cards here, which we'll go over later, that has a Chinese backdoor on it, basically. We'll put that on the reader. And then all I do is hit yes. We write the card. So now we have this DEF CON hotel card is now cloned onto this card. So that is an unhardened card. They're cheap, they're easy to clone. But now that we've done that, I'm actually going to kick off a longer one for part of the live demo, which takes, it's a longer time to crack. So this is also Mifare card, but it's a hardened card, so you can't crack them that quickly. So I'm going to put that one on the reader, and then if you'd like to switch back over to there so I can see what I'm doing. So now that we have the new card on the reader, I'm going to do a list, an NFC-list. This is part of NFC tools built into Kali Linux. You run that and it'll show you the UID of the card itself, so you can know what that is and you can make sure that the reader's reading the card. So now that I have that, I will once again run the mylazycracker script, and we will just let that get going to work.
Is that script just on GitHub somewhere?
The script is on GitHub. I will link to it. I'll have a copy of all the slides and everything available at the end. And I'll tweet it out as well so you can find it that way. So this card is going to take a lot longer to crack, and so while that's running, we'll go over the rest of this. So besides the Kali Linux install, you don't necessarily need Kali. You need some type of Linux, but Kali has most of the stuff installed by default. The biggest problem if you do it in a VM is you have issues with the USB pass-through, especially on a Mac. It likes to capture all the stuff even if you try to pass it through. You'll need the mylazycracker script, which we'll go over. You need the card reader itself. It's an ACS card reader. The model is ACR122U. Like I said, they're about $35 shipped from China. You'll of course need the card that you want to crack, and then you'll need a card to clone it to. So the Mifare families have, there's a few different families out there. There's the Mifare Classic, which is kind of like the original one. And a little bit about it is, they rolled their own crypto, which as we all know is a huge no-no. And so because they rolled their own crypto, they had a vulnerability that made it really easy to crack. So they ended up, after the Mifare Classic, they fixed it with what was called the Mifare Classic EV1. There's also 3 other families out there. There's the Mifare Plus, Ultralight, and Desfire. And they all have increasing levels of security on those cards. So with the Mifare Classic vulnerabilities, with the original one, as you saw, we cracked it in little less than 3 minutes. They're very easy to crack. And there's a couple of other attacks that have happened where if you have a faster reader, like if you do have a Proxmark, you can use some of these other attacks to crack the card in about 10 seconds. The Mifare Classic, because that happened in, I think it was 2008, they ended up cracking it. In 2011, they released a new card called the Mifare Classic EV1. And this card is a hardened card, so it's harder to crack, and it actually remains secure for 4 years this time. So they figured out how to crack it in 2015 using what's called the hard-nested attack. As a result of that, NXP does not recommend that you actually use Mifare Classic cards for anything anymore. However, pretty much all of the hotels out there still use Mifare Classic cards. If we go back to that picture of the cards I showed at the beginning with the slide, out of all the cards I have laid out on the table here, which is probably about 30 cards, I have a total of 4 that are not Mifare Classics. So it's very sad.
Why? Why aren't they all using the new one?
It takes money. Security costs money, and so it's not a fun way to do stuff.
And effort.
Yes. So, and then just as an FYI, some of the other cards out there, including the Desfire and Ultralights, before you get into the EV1s of those, they also have vulnerabilities. You can look them up and play around with those. I saw a question?
Yeah, if it takes 3 minutes to break one of these things, can you make a copy of it like immediately and then crack it later?
No. The way that, so the question was, if you see a card, can you instantly copy and then crack it later? The reason why you cannot do that is because they have access control on the card where you can't actually read the contents of the card until you have the key to access those contents. And so that's why it's the 3 minutes to crack that one card, because it takes about that long to end up going through and, with the weaknesses and cracking that. So we're going to go and talk about the Mifare Classic attacks now. And in the Mifare Classic attacks, there's 2 main tools that have been out there for a while. The first one is called MFOC, and this is part of NFC Tools. When you install that library, it'll have all these utilities. MFOC is a nested attack, which means that to keep on going that, we need to know a key on the card. But the funny thing is, pretty much, in fact, I have not encountered a single hotel key card that did not have one sector with the default key set. And the other type is called the MFC UK, which is a darkside attack. And you have to use that type of attack if you don't know any of the keys on the card. So we're going to just show you the 2 different cards out there. This is an app called Tag Info. You tap it to a card and it will show you the type of card you're working on. So you see on the left, I have a card that it comes up and says it's an unknown manufacturer, it's an unknown Mifare IC, possibly cloned. And yes, most of these cards are Chinese cards. They don't have the back door on them, but they're not a genuine NXP card. On the right-hand side, you can see we have another card that I've scanned. It says it's a Mifare Classic EV1. If it's the EV1, it is hardened against those attacks that we've talked about. And so that's the thing where they came out and it was safe for about 4 years. But the funny thing is with that is we have that hard-nested attack, but we need to have a single known key. But as I said before, all the hotels don't change all of the keys. They only change the part that they use for the door. So this is really easy because at least one key on the card is just all Fs. And so what we do here is we run the nested attack a bunch of times. And as that attack's running, we get some bits back called nonces. But the fun part about this is we can collect enough nonces to then make brute forcing it relatively easy. So I'm actually going to check on here. And sorry for switching to such a, in fact, can I make that text bigger? Not easily. Let's try that. Nope. So this key we can see on one side of it. We have all of these are just the default key of F for every single sector. On the other side, we have a couple of keys, but not all of them. And there we go. So we found almost all of the keys now. We just cracked that one. So we're now collecting nonces to get that last key.
What's the nonce?
It's a little hard to describe. Look it up.
Okay.
It's basically, it's the magic bits that we collect.
Okay.
And actually it looks like we are having some sort of a technical issue, which is always fun. The demo gods, I guess, do not like me today. So we'll see if this is successful or not. If it isn't, then we'll just have to restart doing the attack. So with this attack that we run, it can take, after we collect the nonces, which narrows the key space that we have to brute force, it'll take anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. This card that I'm working on right now, we saw that it had 2 different keys that we didn't know. So we got one of the keys, and then we're trying to go through and collect the stuff on the other key now. So the problem is I'm lazy. I don't like having to try to learn all the commands and run them all and point the script to say, this is the key file that I'm using, this is my saved progress. I don't like doing any of that. The solution is someone else who's lazy.
Yay.
So there's My Lazy Cracker. It was introduced by Kevin Larson last year at a conference called Recon. There's his GitHub link for it. He's basically put it out there and then abandoned it. So it's been forked multiple times, but the fork that I'm using is from the NFC Tools project. So this has officially been adopted in the NFC Tools project, but it's not installed on Kali. The reason I believe why it's not is because it does use some modified things that are a little bit different from our normal stuff. So it uses a modified version of MFOC to do a quick detection to see if we can use the easy attack or if we have to do the hard nested attack. And then we have a modified libNFC that as it's running, it dumps extra data into the file so we can more easily automate it later on. So Kevin wrote a script that basically ties all of these tools together, and he called it My Lazy Cracker. It's a little bit tricky to install, and so I'm going to go over that just briefly at the end with some of the things I found. And then as I have some time over the next few weeks, I will more fully document it. I'll update the presentation, and I'll send out another tweet when I have that stuff updated. So the live demo we are trying to run right now, and it looks like it's still not quite happy. It's still failing and being grumpy. So we will see if that does work or not. It does say it's collecting the nonces still. It needs about 3,000 nonces before it can start brute forcing it. And so while that's running, I'll go over some of the issues that I have had. One of the problems is the installer script points to 2 files that the place that you downloaded them from are no longer there. The guy who distributes them had them under a license where it's only he can distribute them. He pulled those files. If you Google the file names, you can find them. And in the link that I send out to the presentation, it may or may not be a Google Drive shared folder that may or may not have those 2 files in it for ease of use. Another thing is I had to get Kali set up for actually doing the compiling. That was kind of tricky. I had to end up enabling the IE386 Arch so I could build things, and it was just a bunch of basically banging my head on the wall and Googling error messages until I got the stuff to build. The next problem that I had was my card reader wouldn't detect anything. So there's that NFC list command that you can run. It will come up and say no card detector, no card reader found. And so there are two kernel modules. It's the PN533_USB and the PN533. You do have to disable both of those. And once again, these are things that I'm going to try to update the presentation and have more detail in there. You also have to download the driver itself from the company that makes it, ACS. The driver that Kali has installed doesn't work very well. So if you download the actual manufacturer's driver, it works a lot better. And then my last problem that I had was I was trying to run this on a VM and I had tons of issues with it. And it's all because the USB pass-through just did not want to work. From what I understand, it's even worse trying to run it on a Mac in a VM. So I demonstrated how to do the one card. Oh, and over here, this looks really bad. Let's do that actually to clear the screen. It didn't work. So it says press enter to start brute force phase. It'll press enter automatically on the first run through, but now that it has a second key, I have to press enter, and now this will go through and finish brute forcing the key and actually get it cracking. So we're going to just let this run. I have a question?
Yeah, so when you press enter to start brute force phase, does brute force phase go faster if you allow it to finish collecting more nonces?
The question was if you let the brute force run longer, or if you run the nonce collection go longer, does the brute force go faster? Once you get to a certain point, it gets more effective to start doing the brute force instead of keeping on to collect more nonces. And so the script actually has those lines built into it so we can do that running. And so we're just going to let this live demo keep on running. Right now it's about 2% done. But while that's running, I'm going to go through and we'll talk a little bit now about, we're going to tie this all into the biohacking class. So Dangerous Things makes an implant called the XM1 Plus. The XM1 Plus is one of these Mifare cards, but it's a Chinese backdoor card. So the way that those work is most NFC cards by default have the serial number, the UID is built in, it's hard-coded, it's unchangeable. If you get the Chinese backdoor cards, they've made these cards so you can actually change that UID by writing a couple of special commands to it. And so by writing those commands to it, you can take a card, we brute force it, we still don't know anything about the hotel's encryption scheme on any of their key system, but we can write the UID and the contents to a card. And so the implant, the XM1 Plus, has that special type of a chip in it. So we can then take these cards after we copy it, and instead of copying it to another card, we can copy it to a chip that we have implanted. Now, the problem is with some of this stuff is some of these hotels are getting a little smarter with it. There's a way that you can detect these cards because they respond to this Chinese backdoor command. You run, so they actually have these set up in a lot of the hotels now where if you tap the card to it and it detects that Chinese backdoor, it'll wipe portion of the card so you can't do anything with it anymore. The only way to get around that is, well, there's two ways. You can buy cards that have a writable UID, but you can write it once and then you can't write it again. Or there's another that's a different backdoor where you can actually just run the command write sector 0 and it'll write sector 0, which isn't supposed to happen. So that may or may not work in the future, depends on how they catch up. You know, security is always a cat and mouse game. But what we do once we're done cracking the card, if you want to clone your implant with it, is you'll take your card and you'll hold your implant at about that spot in about that orientation. And that will clone the implant and you're done. So it's fairly simple. Because this card is taking a while, you can see we're only at about, let's see, what is that? That's 10%, 11% done. So if you want to hang around, you can watch the numbers tick up. But that's about the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
What were the hotels
It's very random, actually. I haven't found really any specific pattern to it. I mainly stay with one specific chain of hotel, and most of their cards actually are the hardened Mifare classics. So one of their newest hotels that they opened in Salt Lake less than a year ago uses Mifare, I believe it's a Deathfire. I can look at that card right now and tell you what it is. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not saying the brand on the recording. So these are a Mifare Ultralight EV1 is what some of these other cards use. Yes, another question.
So if the hotels were more active and changed the default key for all of the sectors, would this still be really feasible?
I don't know if this attack would be feasible because the attack that we do assumes that we know at least one key.
So it's laziness.
A lot of it's laziness, a lot of it's not knowing what to do. And just as an example here, not all hotels are even using NFC. I have this giant collection of cards from various hotels that these are all mag stripe. So hotels don't like upgrading things because it costs them money, and so if something works, they like to stay with it as long as they can. Are there any other questions? Yes.
If I go to a hotel, how can I tell what kind of cards they use? Do I
So,
need to buy one of those readers, or
so if you want to read a card to see what type of card it is, there's a few different apps out there on the phone. I did the screenshot of one of the apps I use. It's called Tag Info by NXP. If you have a phone that does NFC, so that's a phone that is, if you can do like Google Pay on it, then it'll do NFC. You download the Tag Info app, you tap the card to it, and it'll tell you what type of card it is without having to do any type of brute forcing. And one thing to note as well is some phones do not have an NXP branded NFC reader in them. They use a different brand. The last one that I dealt with that was the other brand was the Nexus 4. So if you have a non-NXP chipset, it actually will not be able to detect any of the Mifare Classic cards. Yes?
So in theory, would it be possible to write the information from a crack code to the NFC chip on a phone?
No.
No?
You can't really clone these to a phone because the phones don't do full emulation by default. There are some people that have figured out rooted ways of the phone to change the UID so it presents it, but it's not stable, it doesn't work very well, and it's more of a pain than what it's usually worth, especially when you can buy grundles of the Chinese backdoor cards for, like, I think these, if you buy them in bulk, you can get them for 50 cents a piece, 25 cents a piece. Yes, another question.
I think his question was, can you write these clone cards from a cell phone?
No.
So,
That's my question then.
so the other question is, can you write a card from a cell phone instead of using this whole reader setup? Some cards you can, some cards you can't. The standard default Chinese backdoor cards, phones aren't capable of sending that command for some reason to write it. There are other cards that you can get that they specifically say they're compatible with another app. This other app is called Mifare Classic Tool, or MCT is the logo of it on the Google Play Store. And you can write the cards to those cards. You're looking at a difference of 25 to 50 cents a piece for the card. To the phone writable ones are $2 to $3 a card.
I've also been able to plug like a Proxmark or something into my phone and then run the Proxmark off my phone and write from that. That works too, but it's not like coming from the phones.
Proxmark is also expensive.
Yeah, it's like 300
Yeah.
bucks.
And the whole goal of this class is to teach you how to do it simply and cheaply. And I don't know if you can get much cheaper than these ACR readers. They do work fairly well.
How much are they?
These readers, after shipping, if you buy some cards with them to play with, they run about $35.
Okay.
Whereas a Proxmark is starting usually at about $150.
Although you can get what you pay for.
Yes.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, the Proxmark is very much more capable, but this reader's cheap and it works really well. These readers are actually pretty nifty hardware in their own right. They can do, besides this type of thing, they have a whole SDK. They're advertised as even supporting mobile payments. So there's a lot of extra stuff that you can do with these readers on top of just cracking your hotel keys. Yes?
Does this kind of stuff only work for hotel keys, or will it theoretically be possible for some other kind of NFC, like say a transit pass?
So it works with any Mifare Classic card.
Okay.
Transit passes are usually not Mifare Classic. The only one I've seen around here is there is a local college that their student ID is a Mifare Classic card and it also doubles as a transit pass.
Is it hardened?
I'm not naming
Okay.
names.
Yeah.
But it is not a hardened card.
That's
It's one of the really easy, fast ones to clone.
Oh no.
So it's entertaining. But most transit systems don't use the Mifare Classics. They'll usually use the Ultralight or the Desfires, and they'll use the newer versions that have still not been publicly released as having been cracked. So it looks like our brute force is still running, but I think now is a good time to just end the presentation. Thanks for coming out.